Hey there guys, it's me Jordy with the School of Evangelism, and we're tackling part 1, how to lead a person to Christ. And under that part we have lesson 7, personal objections. A lot of people have personal objections when you try to lead them to Christ. So we're going to tackle some of those objections that they have. And our key verse for today comes from Jeremiah 17 verse 9. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? So our first question is, if God loves us, why does he make us suffer? This is one of the common questions that a lot of people ask. So, suffering is due to Satan, or it's due to sin. Once man died in sin, the whole world has suffered because of it. So that's why there is suffering in the world. And our verses here are Luke chapter 13, verse 16, and Galatians chapter 6, verses 7 to 8. Now, God allows suffering to refine faith and to glorify himself. To refine faith, 1 Peter chapter 1 verses 6 to 7, and to glorify himself, John chapter 9 verse 3. Now God is in control in times of testing. 1 Corinthians chapter 10 verse 13. He's in control. He will never give us something that is above what we can handle, and he will always make a way for us to escape, especially when it comes to temptations. Now, Jesus suffered for us, Isaiah 53 verse 3 to 5. He was wounded for our transgressions. Jesus suffered for us. The second thing is, I am incorrigible. I am incorrigible. A lot of people feel that where they've gotten to in their life, like how deep they've fallen in sin, they're just too unworthy, like they're too bad. There's no coming back from all the things that, I've done. But God can change you into a new creation. 2 Corinthians 5 verse 17. He makes us into a new creation, and old things are passed away and we become new. Look at the life of Paul. At first he was Saul, persecuting Christians, and he became Paul, one of the greatest apostles in the New Testament. God can give us a new lifestyle. Romans chapter 6 verse 3 to 8 and 1 Corinthians chapter 6 verse 9 to 11. He can definitely give us a new lifestyle. And he also gives us a new freedom. Romans chapter 8 verse 2. Now, another thing that people may say is, I am too sinful. Nothing can alter my past. Well, no one is beyond redemption. Jesus can deal with the past. Isaiah 53 verse 6. And John chapter 1 verse 29 and Romans chapter 10 verses 9 to 13. Jesus is willing to accept. John chapter 6 verse 37. Another thing they say, I am basically a good and sincere person. I shall do my best. Now, if the person is a moralist, he sees no need to give his life to Christ. So, I'm good. I pay my taxes. I'm a really good citizen. I obey all the laws and everything. So I'll just keep doing my best. Why should I have Christ? Well, our goodness is not enough for God. And we see that in Isaiah 64 verse 6 and Romans chapter 3 verse 10 to 11. Our goodness is not enough for God. To be good enough, we must be perfect. James chapter 2 verse 10. And we cannot be perfect by our own human will or human strength. Our hearts are deceitful. Jeremiah chapter 17 verse 9. It tells us about our heart being desperately wicked. Who can know it? It's deceitful above all things. We can't trust our hearts. It's very deceitful. One can be sincerely wrong, especially Paul. Acts chapter 1 verse 9. The story of Paul when he was Saul persecuting Christians, and he actually believes that, what he was doing was right, but he was sincerely wrong. Now, good works cannot save us. Ephesians chapter 2 verses 8 to 9 and Titus chapter 3 verse 5. Our good works alone cannot save us. Now, the issue is relationship with Jesus. We have to have a relationship with Jesus, because he's the way, the truth, and the life. And no one can go to the Father except through him. We have to have a relationship with Jesus. 1 John chapter 5 verse 11 to 12 and John 3 36. Another thing that people may say, I shall decide someday. Someday, one day, I'll give my life to Christ. Let me live a little. Let me do some things. One day I'll do that. But, tomorrow may never come. There's a song even that sounds like that, I'll give my life tomorrow. But what about today? What about right now? So God's time is now. Isaiah 55 verse 6 and 2 Corinthians chapter 6 verse 2. We have to give our lives to Christ now. Now there's a warning for neglecting the truth. Hebrews chapter 2 verse 3. If we neglect so great a salvation, that was given unto us, we shouldn't neglect so great a salvation. How shall we escape? Now 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 verses 9 to 12. Also a warning for neglecting the truth. Now, another thing that people say, some Christians are worse than non-Christians. I mean, really, but you shouldn't use what other Christians are doing or what other people are doing as a yardstick for your own life, for your own soul and your own salvation. No, you should think about your own. Now, the issue is not who is better, but who has been forgiven and accepted by God. That is the issue at hand. And so we should have personal responsibility. You should have personal responsibility for your own soul and where you will end up in eternity. Romans chapter 14 verse 4 and also verses 10 to 12. Now the personal response to Jesus, because Jesus is calling us to him. He's calling us to give our lives to him. John chapter 5 verse 24 and Romans chapter 10 verses 6 to 11. Now, another thing that people say, Christianity is a Western religion. Yes, Christianity came from the West. A lot of people say, oh, we had our own way of worshiping God before, the colonial masters came and introduced Christianity and they changed things and all that. It's a Western religion. Well, let's understand that Jesus was born in Israel, which is in the Middle East. So there's no way that the Christian is a Western religion. If you wanted to be geographical about it, Jesus was born in the Middle East. Now the gospel is for all mankind. It's for all mankind. It's not for one nation. It's not for one race. It's not for one tribe. We are all for the gospel. Mankind is supposed to benefit from the gospel. Acts chapter 1 verse 8 and Romans chapter 1 verses 14 to 16. And God is not prejudiced. God is not prejudiced to one people. God is not prejudiced to one people. Acts chapter 10 verse 34 and Colossians chapter 3 verse 11. God loves all of his creation and he wants all of us to come back to him. And that brings us to the end of lesson 7 under how to lead a person to Christ. That's part 1, the personal objections that people may have. And our memory verse is Acts chapter 10 verse 34. Then Peter opened his mouth and said, of a truth, I perceive that God is no respecter of persons. So it's not your rank that will determine your relationship with God. It's not your personal influence on earth that will determine your relationship with God. He's no respecter of persons in that respect. So kindly make sure that you read along all the verses that have been mentioned in this lesson and you'll be powerfully blessed. See you again in the next lesson. Goodbye.